Today I want to talk about why the US and Canadian military are preparing for this virus to flare up in a really bad way later this year. We also have some very critical information to share with you with regards to how this virus transmits and how you can factor it into your preparedness plan accordingly. Let's get to it. Now we're going to talk about some very critical information which all points to this thing peaking in a very bad way in around 6 weeks in the northern parts of the world. This is very critical information that I think everybody needs to heed, because I think this is going to hit the northern parts of the United States, Canada as a whole, and parts of middle to northern Europe, and everybody else along this latitude. Based on this information, it may hit these regions much harder than anywhere else in the world. We're also going to talk about why the US and Canadian military are planning for a massive resurgence in cases, a possible, even more devastating second wave come fall and winter of this year. Now, there's a highly informative article I'm going to post in the description, and it is entitled "The Seasonality of SARS-CoV-2. Will the sea bug go away on its own in winter weather?" And there's many more studies I want to talk about, but this is a very crucial one. Now, this study lays the foundation for what we know about the seasonality of various pathogens. To synopsize the article, the idea that the common cold has little to no transmission in summer is, of course, false. While indeed there is a reduction in spread, it is certainly not eradicated, especially for a novel virus that nobody has immunity for. It's much different if people have immunity or have been exposed to similar viruses in the past. This is a novel virus. That in itself may trump any seasonal effects. Now, he identifies 3 factors that dictate why viruses spread during different seasons. The 3 main factors are humidity, so the more humid, the less likely it is to spread. The colder, the more likely it is to spread. And the more ultraviolet radiation and the longer days make it much less harder to spread. The second factor is human behavior. Of course, in winter time, humans spend more time indoors and in close quarters, and there's less ventilation, meaning it's more likely to transmit. The third is the average person's weakened immunity in wintertime due to numerous vitamin deficiencies that can be attributed to lack of sunlight and even possibly the lack of exercise. So the gist of it is that because it's a novel virus, these environmental factors are less likely to have an impact. This is why we do see the virus trying to take root in warmer and more humid climates. However, its infected numbers there are still far lag behind places in the northern hemisphere.
The advent of summer and hotter weather will slow down the spread of the virus in the temperate countries in Europe and America. But no one knows whether this will happen. Right? This is a new virus. No one knows. Even in hot and humid Singapore, the virus continues to spread. So maybe it does at a slower rate, but I don't think it will go away with the summer. So if that's not going to happen, and if you look at the infection curve in Europe and America now, it's not reached its peak. It's continuing likely for weeks and beyond.
Now, there's a couple of research papers that I'm going to post in the description if you're interested in learning more about the potential seasonality of COVID-19. Now, I came across these articles while watching a Paul Beckwith video where he's talking about this particular issue, so credit to him for finding these articles. Go check out his channel. I'll post a link in the description. The summary of both these papers is essentially that there may be certain regions of the world where this disease is more likely to take root at different times of year. There may be a potential Goldilocks zone in what they're calling the 5 to 11 degrees Celsius zone, which is currently situated between the latitudes of 30 and 50 degrees. Put it in perspective, this is basically all of mainland Europe, most of the contiguous United States, parts of China, of course, the Middle East, and pretty much anywhere where civilization has really taken off. Now, of course, as we progress into the summer months, this Goldilocks zone may move northward, and correspondingly it will move downward again come fall and winter. This may explain why Russia has seen so few cases, and why India has seen so few cases, because they too are out of this Goldilocks zone. It would also explain why South America and Africa haven't had so many cases. Now, if you look at the countries where this has really taken root, Italy, Iran, China, all of the average temperatures lie within this Goldilocks zone. An average temperature in Italy of 14 degrees at this time of year. Average temperature in Iran of 16 degrees. Average temperature in China of between 7 and 15 degrees. So they all fall within this Goldilocks zone. And as the summer approaches, this Goldilocks zone, of course, is going to move northward into Eastern Europe, Russia, Mongolia, and other countries of the sort. And of course, the trend will be reversed come fall and winter, with the worst of the effects possibly felt all the way down to Mexico in the new year. So judging by this rationale, I may have to retract a prediction I made with regards to India, in that the better part of India doesn't fall within this Goldilocks zone right now. But because this is a novel virus, and because nobody has immunity, and because there's such a high population density there, these factors may override the Goldilocks zone principle, and this could potentially still spread there also. There's also some evidence for this in other parts of the world, where we see New York has 4 times the amount of cases as California, where it's much warmer and more humid. Now, there is some limited community transmission going on in Australia. We'll have to see whether or not that does go exponential. It appears to be on the cusp of doing so, but it's still hard to tell at this point. Remember that Australia had a very disproportionate amount of cases at the start due to its proximity to Asian countries and the frequency of flights in and out of there from the hotspot in China. So what we may be seeing in some of these warmer climates like Brazil, Australia, California, that all seem to have around 1,000 cases, is a spread that might be more based on the fact that this is a novel virus that everybody can catch, the high population density within these regions, and the amount of traffic going in and out of these regions. Now, of course, the rest of the southern hemisphere, many South American countries as well as African countries, don't have as much air traffic going in and out of them. They generally have a much younger population. And of course, many of these countries don't have the testing, which might explain why there isn't many cases detected there yet, which is not to say that they're totally immune. But in spite of these examples that are outside of the Goldilocks zone, it's undeniable that within this zone, the virus has really taken root in a way which is far more aggressive than these other places. Now, we know that this virus is equally infectious to everybody, but it's 100 times more fatal in the elderly than it is in children. Now, granted, there's a few other factors that could potentially be at work here. For starters, Russia closed the border really early, and they were very aggressive in their defense against this virus from the get-go. And in a lot of these southern hemispheric countries, they don't have the means to detect the virus itself, so for all we know, it could be spreading. But because the population is so young, they're not really showing a lot of the effects yet. This, of course, doesn't take into account all the other variables like lifestyle habits, smoking, other health problems a person may have, whether you're overweight or not, things of that nature. What this means is that in the next couple months, as the Goldilocks zone moves northward, this is going to come to Canada in a bad way, and northern parts of the United States, particularly the East Coast. Now, there is another research paper that I'll attach here, which does show that there actually isn't much correlation between humidity and the prevalence of this virus, meaning that regardless of the humidity of the place you're in, it doesn't seem to have a whole lot of effect. Whereas on most viruses, this does have a very significant effect, such that the higher the humidity, the less transmissible the disease is. I won't get into the specifics of that, but essentially it's that if you were to cough, the small particles would quickly accumulate moisture and they would fall to the ground faster, making it less airborne droplet transmissible. That tends to be the case with most viruses. Now, there's a lot of other variables that may be at play here, and these are only 2 studies. But it's safe to assume that there will be some seasonality with this virus. And on the basis of these papers anyways, it's pointing towards the fact that indeed, come fall and winter, we could see a massive resurgence of this. Now remember, it was the second wave of the Spanish flu that dealt humanity the most devastating blow. And the age group which it targeted in that second wave, primarily was younger people, middle-aged people. Now, the reasons for that are debatable because obviously they were the ones who were fighting on the front lines in the trenches. They were the nurses. They were the people out there getting their hands dirty while the elderly and the children were away from the front lines. But when all was said and done with the Spanish flu, age wasn't a huge factor. No matter how old you were definitely at risk. Now, this also had to do with the lack of antibiotics in order to treat the secondary bacterial infections. But regardless, everyone was falling victim to that disease. That doesn't seem to be the case with this one. Although there is new research, especially in the United States and France, showing that this disease does affect young people and can be fatal or have lifelong debilitating effects. It's hard to say how this novel virus is going to mutate because this is a very new virus and it is spreading through the population at a rapid rate, and every time it spreads, there is a possibility for a new mutation to occur. And remember that the mutations that occur are the ones that allow the virus to be more successful in its transmissibility. The virus wants to transmit to as many people as it can. Its sole purpose is to multiply. Arguably, that's the purpose of everything that lives on the planet. So every time a person is quarantined and it cannot multiply, that branch of the virus's evolutionary tree comes to an end. But every time one successfully transmits to another, whatever makes it successful in that transmission, be it a longer incubation period or more mild symptoms throughout the early phase of the disease, are the traits which are going to be passed on to the successor generation of the virus. This means that our aggressive containment efforts are an attempt to combat this process of the virus mutating and evolving. Because every time that virus finds a way around quarantine, it gets smarter. It's evolving. It's mutating. If this means that the virus must still be infectious after symptoms subside and after people test negative, then that's what the disease will evolve to do, because it will be that genetic variation which gets passed on. So as we lock down on this virus, it has no choice but to mutate and become smarter. If we are not 100% successful in these efforts, this may force the virus to get stronger in the same way that a vaccine forces next year's virus to mutate, to get stronger. It's like every year we put a new lock on the door, and every year the virus picks the lock. So we have to keep changing the locks on the door. This is why people who get the flu shot need a different vaccination every year to keep up with the mutating virus. But what you need to know is that the government, the military, the people who have taken this as seriously as they have, locking down half the planet in an unprecedented fashion. None of us would have thought this would have happened 3 months ago. Think about it. In December, nobody was talking about this. Now, nobody is allowed to leave their houses. This is a very serious situation, and we're not going to know the true extent of how serious it is until it's over. They're projecting this won't peak in the United States for 6 weeks. 6 weeks until it peaks. That doesn't mean it's going to be over, because remember, there could potentially be a second wave. The United States is now reporting over 5,000 cases a day, up from just 100 cases a day a little over a week ago. At that rate, it won't be long before half the population is infected with this illness, which not only has a respectable fatality rate, but even if you survive it, there's a chance that you may have lifelong respiratory complications. It's a dangerous illness that everybody should respect. Now, this article that I was reading here really caught my eye. It's on CNN, so take it with a grain of salt. But it's titled that the U.S. military is preparing for a second wave of coronavirus cases by next winter. Now, we already know that the militaries of the world are in some capacity being activated for this outbreak's response. But the fact that they're already thinking this far ahead concerns me. And that while we should be focused on the present, because this still could very much get out of control, the fact that there are think tanks already brainstorming the possibility for a second wave of this is quite frightening. Because typically throughout history, the second wave of these pandemics have been the worst. Take the Spanish flu, for instance, in which the second wave was an order of magnitude worse than the first wave. The majority of people passed away during the second wave. And this current outbreak follows the same trajectory as the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu started in March of 1918, and the flu had a small peak in April and started to die down when the summer months came. But in as early as August, cases started to emerge again. Clusters started to form, and they started to see exponential growth, which set off one of the worst plagues in humanity's history throughout that winter. Now, the third wave wasn't as bad, but it was the second wave which was the most devastating. So I'm going to read you a snippet of this article here, which indicates that some researchers are warning that this may well be a perennial threat. So while speaking at the Pentagon briefing on Thursday, Nelson Michael, the director for infectious disease research at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, said that efforts to develop vaccines and an effective treatment plan may not be quick enough to wipe out the virus before the second wave in winter, which they're already anticipating. So if you think that this is bad, this may well just be a dress rehearsal, everything we're doing now, for the real SHTF situation, which is going to happen in wintertime. Now, there's a chance that this may not happen if the lockdown measures that are taking place right now are actually successful. In order for the lockdown to be successful, it will have dire economic consequences. Either way, we're damned if we do, or we're damned if we don't. They say that this is a respiratory virus and they always give us trouble during cold weather. For obvious reasons. We're all inside, the windows are closed, etc. So we typically call that influenza or the flu season, Nelson said. He predicted that coronavirus may behave like flu and give us less trouble as the weather warms up, but he cautioned it tends to come back when the winter gets cold again. This is why it's really important to understand that a lot of what we're doing now is getting ourselves ready for what we're calling the second wave of this, Nelson said. Now he goes on to say that we hope this doesn't happen. If you recall SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS came and went very quickly. We can't count on that in this case, which should be obvious right now because we're already almost at 200,000 cases at the time of this video's release, which is 30 times that of SARS in a much shorter period of time. So the SARS comparison is purely genetic at this point. We can't count on that. We have to be ready that even if this epidemic begins to wane, we have to be ready for next winter when it may come back again. Here's another article from the CBC who interviewed General Jonathan Vance of the Canadian Air Force. He indicates that the Canadian military is preparing to respond to multiple waves of the pandemic, which would stretch out over a year or more. Bear in mind, this is the country's top military commander. It should be known, however, that they are planning for the worst case scenario, just in case it gets out of hand. They're not saying that it's necessarily going to, although there may be some evidence to support the worst case scenario. They're basing this on the very well established fact that the overwhelming majority of viruses transmit better in wintertime. And they worry that if they cannot contain this by fall, then infection rates may flare up even worse than they're able to do right now. Now, he indicates that the military may be involved in bolstering the capability to produce different types of medical equipment and also administering medical care, even transporting the bodies of those who have passed on as a result of COVID-19. And I would guess that at some point may even possibly play some role in providing emergency services, aka law enforcement. So what I worry is going to happen, and I think what a lot of health authorities have already been concerned about, is that people are going to get over this first wave of the virus. The borders are going to open again. The numbers are possibly going to die down. Of course, they may jump to the southern hemisphere. But remember that this virus doesn't just go away, much like the flu. If it just went away when the seasons changed, then it would never come back. But obviously we know it does. It goes from the southern to the northern hemisphere. It follows the weather. So I think what we are going to see after the lockdown subsides is that we are going to see a rapid mobilization to get even more prepared for the potential bigger wave which may kick off in wintertime. And it's going to appear that we've reached the peak in the top of the mountain, and that's when people are going to start relaxing their guards again. And because this spreads even when carriers are asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic and is very indistinguishable from the common cold or the flu and a lot of its characteristics, that this is going to continually circulate throughout the summer months. And healthcare systems are going to think they have a handle on it because, of course, we flattened the curve and we bought some time. Cases are going to start going up rapidly once again. Now, by that time, we would hope that we have built some herd immunity, but that is highly doubtful. The best estimates that I've heard is that in order to build herd immunity, around 75% of the population needs to be infected to act as a firewall, I guess, so the other 25% don't get infected. Now, what's likely to happen is that a lot of the social distancing stuff is going to stick with people for a long, long time. People are going to be far more conscious about washing their hands, personal hygiene, maintaining distance. I do believe that the handshake is on its way out as a method of greeting. We're going to start seeing more fist bumping, more elbow bumping. I've always been more of a fist bumper anyways. Every time somebody approaches me with a handshake, they get disrespected, but I do it out of respect for them because it just makes sense. So one of the saving graces may be the fact that we will buy ourselves time, that these government agencies are given the time they need to mobilize and put a plan in place, and that will already have been conditioned to the lockdown scenario, that hopefully that preparedness mindset is going to stick with some people, and we won't see the panic buying and the supply chain disruptions that we're seeing now with the closed borders, and that we'll be able to flatten the curve of the second wave as well. So my message here would be to the preparedness community is that prepare for the long game with this. Start thinking about what your plan is going to be when fall comes around. Now, I know that might seem like premature speculation, but it really isn't far away when you think about it. I mean, the first 3 months of this year have already gone by, and the only thing on the news has been Iran and coronavirus. So time is moving very rapidly, and the decisions that we make today will make or break the effectiveness of our second wave strategy. Anyways, guys, stay safe out there. We're all in this together. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Canadian Prepper out.